What if the man you loved abandoned you in your darkest hour? How do you pick up the pieces when family, society, and your own doubts all turn against you at once? And can the deepest betrayal actually become the unexpected doorway to a life more fulfilling than you ever imagined? My name is Seth, and 5 years ago I thought I had it all figured out. Owen and I had met in a crowded Seattle coffee shop during our senior year at the University of Washington. He was the confident law student with the easy smile and the sharp wit that made every conversation feel like an adventure. I was the quiet graphic designer who preferred sketching ideas on napkins rather than speaking up in class. We clicked instantly, two guys from completely different worlds who somehow made sense together. Our first date stretched into the night as we walked along the waterfront, sharing stories about coming out to skeptical parents and dreaming about a future where we didn't have to hide. By graduation, we were officially a couple, renting a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill and promising each other that no matter what life threw at us, we would face it side by side. The first cracks appeared so subtly I almost missed them. Owen had just landed a junior associate position at a prestigious downtown firm, the kind of job that came with late nights and high expectations. I was freelancing, bouncing between client projects that paid the bills but never quite felt stable. When my mother called one rainy Tuesday to say she needed help with her mounting medical bills after a hip replacement, I didn't hesitate. I took on extra work, skipped meals, and stayed up until dawn to meet deadlines. Owen noticed the exhaustion in my eyes but kept saying, "We'll get through this, babe. Just hang in there." I believed him because that was what we did. We believed in each other. Then the company I relied on for my biggest contract filed for bankruptcy. Overnight, half my income vanished. Bills piled up like accusations on the kitchen counter. I started skipping lunches to stretch every dollar, and the stress triggered the return of the anxiety I thought I had left behind in college. Owen's hours at the firm grew longer. His texts became shorter. One evening I waited up with the dinner I had scraped together, pasta with whatever was left in the fridge, only to watch him walk through the door at midnight, briefcase in hand, barely looking at me. "Rough day," he muttered, heading straight for the shower. I told myself it was temporary. Love like ours didn't crumble over money. The night everything shattered started like any other. I had just received the eviction notice in the mail. Our landlord was raising rent again, and we were already 3 weeks behind. My hands shook as I set the paper on the table. Owen came home late again, tie loosened, eyes tired. I poured him a glass of the cheap wine we kept for celebrations and tried to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk about this," I said. He read the notice once, twice, then set it down without a word. The silence stretched until he finally spoke. "Seth, I can't do this anymore. The firm is offering me a transfer to the New York office, big promotion, big salary. But they want someone focused, someone who can travel and close deals without complications." His eyes flicked to the stack of bills, to my hunched shoulders, and I felt the weight of every unspoken word. "I love you," he added, but the tone was already past tense. "I just can't carry both of us right now." I sat there frozen while he packed a suitcase. He left the key on the counter, kissed my forehead like I was a child who needed comforting, and walked out. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the empty apartment. I didn't cry that night. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every promise we had made, every time he had said, "forever," like it was a contract he could break whenever it became inconvenient. By morning, the reality sank in. Owen had chosen his career over me the moment life got hard. I was alone, broke, and suddenly very aware that being gay in a world that still whispered judgments made everything feel twice as heavy. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of survival. I sublet the apartment to a friend from my old design program and moved into a cramped studio above a laundromat in the Ballard neighborhood. The constant hum of dryers became the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. I applied for every freelance gig I could find, swallowing pride when I had to bid low just to keep the lights on. My sister Claire called from Portland, her voice tight with worry. She had never fully understood my relationship with Owen. "He always seemed a little too polished for you," she once said, but now she offered the spare room in her house. I thanked her and lied that I was fine. Admitting I needed saving felt like proving every stereotype right. The gay son who couldn't make it on his own. Social media made it worse. Owen's profile showed him in crisp suits at Manhattan networking events, smiling beside partners at galas. A mutual friend tagged him in a photo with an arm around a tall blonde guy whose name I refused to learn. The caption read, "New city, new beginnings." I deleted the app from my phone and stared at the blank screen until my eyes burned. Nights were the hardest. I would lie on the thin mattress and replay our last conversation, searching for the exact moment I had stopped being enough. Was it when I asked for help with the bills? When I admitted the anxiety was back? Or had Owen simply been waiting for an exit ramp the entire time? One afternoon I wandered into the local LGBT community center on a whim, drawn by a flyer for a support group titled, "When Love Leaves." The room was small, folding chairs arranged in a circle, and the dozen men inside looked as exhausted as I felt. The facilitator, a gentle bear of a guy named Marcus who had lost his partner to cancer years earlier, asked each of us to share one sentence about why we were there. When my turn came, the words tumbled out before I could stop them. My boyfriend left because I was struggling financially and emotionally, and I don't know how to stop feeling like it's my fault. The group nodded without pity, and for the first time in months I didn't feel invisible. Marcus handed me his card afterward and said, "Healing isn't linear, Seth, but you're already doing the hardest part, showing up." I started attending every Tuesday. The stories I heard mirrored my own in different keys. Men whose families stopped speaking to them after coming out. Men who lost jobs when bosses learned they were gay. Men who watched their partners choose comfort over commitment. Listening helped me breathe again. I began sketching again, not for clients but for myself. Late at night I drew scenes from my life. Owen's back as he walked away, the empty apartment, the community center chairs. The lines were raw, but they felt honest. One drawing I posted anonymously online caught the eye of a small indie publisher looking for illustrations for a queer memoir. The gig paid enough for 2 months' rent and reminded me that my talent hadn't disappeared just because Owen had. Claire visited unexpectedly one weekend, suitcase in hand, and refused to leave until I let her help sort through the chaos. We sat on the floor eating cheap takeout while she listened to the whole story without interrupting. "Owen was never going to stay when things got real," she said quietly. "But you're the one who always figured out how to keep going." Her words lodged somewhere deep, loosening the knot I had carried since the night he left. That weekend we drove to the coast, walked the windy beach, and for a few hours I remembered what it felt like to exist without measuring myself against someone else's expectations. Back in the city, I landed a steady contract with a nonprofit that worked with at-risk LGBTQ youth. The pay wasn't glamorous, but the mission fit like a glove. Designing campaigns that showed young gay kids they weren't alone gave me purpose I hadn't felt since college. I started volunteering on weekends, mentoring a shy 17-year-old named Alex who reminded me of myself at that age. Scared, talented, and convinced the world would never accept him. Teaching him how to turn doubt into art felt like handing forward the lessons I was still learning myself. Owen's name still surfaced in conversations with old friends, but I stopped flinching. The ache remained, quieter now, like an old scar that only hurt when the weather changed. I realized the abandonment had stripped away the illusion that love alone could save me. What was left was me. Flawed, anxious, broke at times, but still standing. And standing felt like the first real victory in a long time. 6 months after Owen left, I received the call that forced me to face another layer of the past. My father's voice on the other end of the line was gruff, the way it had always been when he was uncomfortable. "Your mother's asking about you," he said. "She's not getting any younger. And well, we heard things didn't work out with that guy." That guy hung in the air like an accusation. I had come out to them at 22 during a tense Thanksgiving dinner. Dad had stared at his plate while Mom cried quietly. They never disowned me, but they never fully embraced it either. Visits became shorter, conversations safer. Owen had been the buffer, charming enough to make them forget their discomfort for a few hours. I drove to Spokane the following weekend, stomach twisting the entire 4-hour trip. The family house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling on the porch where I used to sketch as a kid. Mom hugged me too tightly, her eyes searching my face for damage. Dad shook my hand like we were business acquaintances. Over pot roast and green beans they asked careful questions about my new job, avoiding any mention of Owen until Mom finally said, "We're sorry it didn't work out, honey. You deserve someone who stays." The words were simple, but they cracked something open. For the first time, I heard acceptance instead of tolerance. Dad even offered to help with the security deposit on a slightly better apartment back in Seattle. I didn't refuse. Pride had cost me enough already. The drive home felt lighter. I stopped in Ellensburg for coffee and sat outside watching the mountains, letting the quiet settle. Family wasn't perfect, but it was still there, bent, not broken. That realization shifted something inside me. I had spent months believing that being gay meant I would always be the outsider, even in my own home. Now I saw the possibility of belonging on my own terms. Back in Seattle, the community center became my anchor. Marcus introduced me to a book club that met once a month. Mostly gay men reading everything from James Baldwin to contemporary queer fiction. We argued passionately over characters who mirrored our lives, and the discussions spilled into late-night dinners at the diner down the block. One regular, a quiet accountant named Liam, became a steady friend. He had survived a messy divorce from his college sweetheart and understood the particular loneliness of starting over after 30. We never crossed into romance. Neither of us was ready, but his steady presence reminded me that connection didn't have to be romantic to matter. Work flourished in unexpected ways. The nonprofit promoted me to lead designer after I created a campaign that went modestly viral. Simple illustrations of young people stepping into light, captioned with real stories from our men's. Donations increased. My boss, a no-nonsense lesbian named Rachel who had marched in the first Seattle Pride, pulled me aside one afternoon. "You've got fire, Seth. Don't let anyone, ex or otherwise, dim it." Her words echoed Claire's and Marcus's, layering like bricks in a foundation I was slowly rebuilding. I started running again, early mornings along the Burke-Gilman Trail. The rhythm of my shoes on pavement matched the steady beat of my thoughts. Each mile chipped away at the voice that still whispered I wasn't enough. By the time I reached 6 miles without stopping, I felt something close to pride that had nothing to do with Owen and everything to do with me. One Tuesday at group, a new guy shared his story of being ghosted after coming out at work. His pain was fresh, eyes red-rimmed. I found myself speaking up without being asked. "It hurts like hell," I said. "But the hurt doesn't get the last word. You get to decide what comes next." The room was quiet for a moment, then someone clapped. Marcus caught my eye across the circle and nodded once. Approval, encouragement, maybe even pride. I left that night feeling taller than when I had arrived. A year after the breakup, I decided to mark the anniversary in a way that felt like closure instead of mourning. I booked a cheap flight to New York, not to chase Owen, but to see the city on my own terms. The nonprofit had sent me to a conference on inclusive design, and the timing felt poetic. I walked the streets Owen had once described in glowing texts, but the skyscrapers didn't feel threatening anymore. They felt possible. I stayed in a tiny Airbnb in Brooklyn and spent evenings wandering the High Line, sketching the skyline at sunset. One night, I sat on a bench overlooking the Hudson and pulled out my phone. For the first time since he left, I typed Owen's name into the search bar. His profile hadn't changed much. Still smiling in suits, still tagged at events. But the blonde guy from the earlier photo was gone, replaced by a series of increasingly forced smiles. A mutual friend had posted that Owen's big promotion had come with more travel than he expected and less fulfillment than promised. The caption read, "Sometimes the view from the top isn't what you thought." I closed the app without liking anything. The sting was there, faint but present, yet it no longer controlled me. On the last day of the conference, I attended a panel on queer representation in media. The speaker, a successful illustrator who had come out publicly after years in the closet, shared a story that sounded eerily like mine. "I let one relationship define my worth for too long," he said. Then I realized the only story I needed to illustrate was my own. His words lodged in my chest like a key turning. That night, I sat in my tiny room and opened my sketchbook to a blank page. Instead of drawing Owen walking away, I drew myself standing on that same New York street, head high, city lights stretching ahead like possibilities. The flight home felt different. I landed in Seattle with a new contract offer in my inbox, designing a national campaign for a major LGBTQ mental health organization. The pay would finally let me move into a one-bedroom with actual windows. I accepted before the wheels touched the runway. Liam picked me up from the airport, grinning as he loaded my suitcase. "You look different," he said. "Like you finally decided to stay in your own story." We grabbed late-night burgers and talked until the diner closed. He told me about a guy he had started seeing. Nothing serious yet, but hopeful. I told him about the new job and the sketches I planned to turn into a personal portfolio. For the first time, the future felt like something I was building, not something I was recovering from. The move happened quickly. I painted the new apartment soft gray and hung my own drawings on the walls. Alex, my mentee, helped carry boxes and stayed for pizza afterward. "You're like the big brother I never had," he said, and the words settled warmly in my chest. I realized I had become the person I once needed. Steady, present, believing in someone else's potential because I finally believed in my own. Family visits became monthly rituals. Dad started asking real questions about my work. Mom sent care packages with homemade cookies and notes that simply said, "Proud of you." The acceptance was imperfect. Dad still avoided saying the word gay out loud, but it was real. I stopped needing it to be perfect. 18 months after Owen left, the past walked back into my life without warning. I was grabbing coffee at the same Capitol Hill shop where we had met when I heard his voice. "Seth." He stood 2 feet away, hair shorter, eyes carrying shadows that hadn't been there before. The suit was still expensive, but it hung a little looser, like the confidence had thinned. We stared at each other for a long moment before he asked if he could buy me a drink. I almost refused. Then I remembered the man I had become and said yes. We sat outside under the awning while rain pattered on the street. Owen spoke first, voice careful. "New York wasn't what I thought. The hours, the pressure, I lost sight of a lot of things, including us." He didn't apologize outright. Owen never had been good at that, but the regret was unmistakable. He asked about my life and I told him the truth. The new job, the apartment, the community work, the drawings that were starting to get noticed. I watched his face as I described the life I had built without him. Something flickered there. Envy, maybe, or just the hollow echo of choices he couldn't unmake. When he asked if there was anyone new, I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm not in a rush." The answer surprised even me. For so long I had measured my healing by whether I could love again. Now I realized healing looked like not needing to. Owen nodded slowly. "You look good, Seth. Really good." The words carried no claim, only acknowledgement. We finished our coffees in silence that felt almost peaceful. When he stood to leave, he hesitated, then simply said, "I'm glad you're doing well." I watched him walk away, this time without the knife twist in my gut. The door closed on that chapter with a quiet click instead of a slam. That evening I called Claire and told her everything. She laughed softly. "Look at you, turning the plot twist into character development." We talked for an hour about nothing and everything, the way sisters do when they know you've finally landed on your feet. The following Tuesday at group, I shared the encounter. The circle listened without judgment. Marcus smiled afterward. "You didn't need to forgive him out loud," he said. "You forgave yourself by living." The words rang true. I had spent months carrying Owen's departure like a debt I owed the universe. Letting it go didn't erase the pain. It simply stopped giving the pain power. Work took me to Los Angeles for a week-long workshop on storytelling through design. I walked Venice Beach at sunset, sketchbook in hand, drawing the ocean and the people who moved along it with easy confidence. A local artist struck up a conversation, and we ended up talking for hours about the courage it takes to keep creating when life tries to silence you. He invited me to a gallery opening the next night. I went, feeling strangely at home among strangers who understood the language of lines and light. The city felt like an extension of the new map I was drawing for myself, wide, bright, full of unexpected turns. Back in Seattle, I finished the national campaign. The launch event filled a downtown gallery with people whose lives had been touched by the work. Alex brought his mother. Liam brought his new boyfriend. Claire flew up for the weekend. Standing in front of the crowd as they applauded the illustrations that told stories like mine, I felt a surge of something I hadn't named before. Belonging. Not to a person, not to a place, but to the version of myself I had fought to become. 2 years after the breakup, I received an email that felt like the final full circle. A small publishing house in Portland wanted to turn my sketches into a graphic memoir. Short chapters about love, loss, and the quiet strength found in between. They offered an advance that would cover a real studio space and time to create. I accepted before the email cooled on the screen. The writing process forced me to revisit every painful memory with honesty instead of bitterness. I wrote about the night Owen left, about the eviction notice, about the community center chairs that had become my lifeline. I wrote about my parents' slow, imperfect acceptance and about Alex's hesitant smile when he showed me his first completed drawing. Each page felt like peeling back another layer until what remained was simply me. Still gay, still human, still moving forward. Marcus read the early drafts and offered gentle feedback. "Don't make yourself the hero too soon," he said. "Let the reader see the struggle." Liam beta-read chapters over late-night video calls, laughing at the parts where I poked fun at my own stubbornness. Claire designed the cover concept using one of my original sketches of the New York skyline. The collaboration reminded me how many hands had helped carry me when I couldn't carry myself. The book launch happened on a crisp autumn evening at the community center, the same room where I had first spoken my pain out loud. The space was packed. My parents drove down from Spokane and sat in the front row. Dad held Mom's hand the entire time. Alex stood beside me when I signed copies, proud as if he had written the words himself. When the last guest left, I stood in the quiet room and felt the full weight of how far I had come. The boy who once believed love's departure meant his own ending had become the man who understood beginnings were his to write. Owen never reached out again, and I never needed him to. His absence had carved the space I needed to grow into. The scar remained, but scars are proof that healing happened. I dated occasionally, coffee with a kind teacher from the youth program, a hike with a fellow illustrator, but nothing serious. The freedom of choosing myself first felt too valuable to rush past. Winter brought a new project, designing a traveling exhibit on LGBTQ resilience for museums across the country. The work took me back to New York, this time as a professional with a book under his belt and a life that felt solid. I walked the same streets I had once feared and saw them differently, full of light, full of stories waiting to be told. One evening I sat on the same bench overlooking the Hudson and opened my sketchbook. Instead of drawing loss, I drew the skyline with a figure in the foreground, head high, hands open, ready for whatever came next. The figure looked like me. Spring arrived with the kind of soft Seattle rain that makes everything feel possible again. The traveling exhibit opened in San Francisco, and I flew down for the reception. Among the guests was a curator named Jordan. Tall, thoughtful, with laugh lines that suggested he had lived enough to know what mattered. We talked for hours about art, identity, and the courage it takes to keep showing up. There was no rush, no pressure, just two men recognizing something honest in each other. For the first time, I didn't measure the conversation against memories of Owen. I simply enjoyed it. Back home, I finished the final pages of the memoir. The last chapter ended not with dramatic triumph, but with a quiet morning. Me making coffee in my studio, sunlight slanting through the windows, sketchbook open to a new drawing. The caption read simply, "I stayed." Felt like the truest ending I could offer. The book released to modest but meaningful success. Reviews mentioned the raw honesty, the way it refused to romanticize pain or promise easy answers. Readers wrote to me, young gay men who saw themselves in the pages, parents learning how to love better, friends who recognize their own stories of abandonment and growth. Each message reminded me that my journey had never been only mine. One afternoon, Alex brought his newest drawing to the center, a portrait of me standing in front of the community center doors, the sign above reading, "Welcome home." He had captured the determination in my eyes and the softness around my mouth that hadn't been there before. I framed it and hung it in my studio where I could see it every morning. The kid who once needed mentoring had become the artist who reminded me why I kept going. My parents visited for the holidays. Dad helped assemble a new bookshelf while Mom baked enough cookies to feed the entire center. Over dinner, Dad raised his glass. "To Seth," he said, voice rough but steady, "for showing us what real strength looks like." The toast was simple, but it landed like grace. Mom squeezed my hand under the table, eyes shining. We had traveled a long road together, and we were still walking. Liam and his boyfriend hosted a small New Year's gathering. We toasted to new chapters, to friendships that had become family, to the lives we were building one honest day at a time. As midnight approached, I stepped onto the balcony and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere in the distance, another man might be learning the same hard lesson I had learned. That being abandoned doesn't mean being broken. It means being free to become. I still run the trail most mornings. I still draw late into the night. I still show up at the community center every Tuesday. The anxiety visits less often now, and when it does, I greet it like an old acquaintance instead of an enemy. Life isn't perfect. Bills still arrive, doubts still whisper. But I have learned to meet both with the same steady hand that once shook when I opened the eviction notice. Owen's name no longer stings. It simply exists as a footnote in a much longer story. The real story is the one I'm living. A gay man in America who lost everything he thought he needed and discovered he had everything he needed inside him all along. The pages keep turning, and for the first time I'm excited to see what comes next. Looking back on the entire journey, I realize the hardest betrayals often arrive dressed as endings, but leave the door open for beginnings we never imagined. The lesson isn't that love always stays. It's that you stay for yourself. Advice? Don't wait for someone else to choose you. Choose yourself every single day, even when it's messy and lonely. Build the life you want with the same hands that once trembled. Surround yourself with people who see your worth even when you forget it. And remember that thriving isn't about proving the one who left wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always enough. I lived that truth, and it changed everything.